The great chamber of the Galactic Concorde stretched across 3 kilometers of polished obsidian and living crystal, and within its curved walls stood representatives from over 100 species that had conquered the stars long before humanity had learned to make fire. High Inquisitor Kethra watched the human delegation enter through the massive doors, and he felt something close to amusement ripple through his crystalline body as he observed these small, soft creatures walking on their fragile legs. They were so utterly unremarkable. The Velnorian Dominion had ruled 12 star systems for over 3,000 years, and in all that time, they had never encountered a species less impressive than these humans. Kethra's people stood nearly 4 meters tall, their bodies made of living crystal that could withstand the vacuum of space and the heat of a star's corona. They had crushed 47 species beneath their feet and had never known defeat in any war. They had chosen to fight, and now these humans, these tiny, water-filled bags of meat and bone, had come to ask for membership in the Galactic Concorde. Ambassador Elena Vasquez led her delegation across the vast floor, her footsteps echoing in the silence that had fallen over the chamber. She was small by any standard, barely reaching the chest of the shortest species present, and her dark hair was pulled back in a simple style that the aliens found primitive. Her eyes, however, held something that made Kethra pause for just a moment, a quiet steadiness that seemed out of place on such a fragile creature. "We welcome the representatives of Earth," announced the speaker, a massive insectoid being whose voice resonated through translation devices worn by every delegate. "You may present your petition for membership in the Galactic Concorde." Ambassador Vasquez stepped forward and bowed her head respectfully before speaking in a clear, calm voice. "Honored members of the Concorde, humanity comes before you today seeking equal standing among the stars," she began. "We have traveled far from our small world, and we wish only to learn from your wisdom and contribute what we can to the galactic community." A sound rippled through the chamber, something between laughter and disbelief. The Kreth delegation, massive reptilian warriors who served as the Velnorians' most loyal vassals, made no attempt to hide their contempt. Their leader, a scarred veteran named Thras, leaned toward his companions and spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. "Equal standing," he growled. "These creatures cannot even survive their own atmosphere for more than a few minutes underwater. They require constant feeding, constant rest, and they die if the temperature changes by a few degrees. What could they possibly contribute?" More laughter followed, and Ambassador Vasquez waited patiently for it to fade. Kethra studied the human woman with growing curiosity. Any other species would have shown anger or shame at such mockery, but Vasquez simply stood there with that same quiet expression, as if she were watching children play a game she had seen many times before. The speaker called for order and then addressed the human delegation directly. "Ambassador Vasquez, the Concorde has reviewed your species submission," the insectoid being announced. "Your technological development is approximately 300 years behind the Concorde standard. Your military capabilities are rated at level 2 on our assessment scale. Your biological resilience is among the lowest we have ever recorded." Vasquez nodded as if this information did not surprise her at all. Given these factors, the speaker continued, "The Concorde is prepared to offer humanity protected species status. Under this designation, you will receive the guidance and protection of more advanced civilizations, and in return, you will provide labor and resources as determined by your patron species." The chamber buzzed with approval. Protected species status was a polite way of saying that humanity would become servants, workers, and soldiers for species that considered themselves superior. It was, in the minds of every alien present, a generous offer for such a weak and primitive people. Ambassador Vasquez was silent for a long moment, and then she smiled, a small, gentle expression that somehow made Kethra deeply uncomfortable. "The people of Earth are grateful for the Concorde's consideration," she said. "We accept this offer and look forward to learning more about our place in the galactic community." Thras laughed again and slapped his massive tail against the floor. "At least they know their place," he declared. "Perhaps they are not as stupid as they look." The session ended, and the delegates began to disperse. Kethra remained in his place, watching as the human delegation gathered their things and prepared to leave. Something was wrong. He could feel it in the way his crystal matrices vibrated. With an unfamiliar frequency, he summoned one of his analysts, a younger Velnorian named Sefkara, and gestured toward the departing humans. Their submission file, Kefra said. I want a complete review. Something is missing. Sefkara bowed and hurried away to complete the task. Several hours later, she returned with a troubled expression on her crystalline features. High Inquisitor, I have found an anomaly, she reported. The humans provided extensive data about their biology, their history, their technology, and their culture. But there is one category conspicuously absent from their submission. Kefra leaned forward with sudden interest. They have provided no information about their military, Sefkara continued. No data on their weapons, their soldiers, their defensive capabilities, or their combat history. The entire category is simply blank. This was unprecedented. Every species seeking membership provided complete military data. It was how the Concord assessed threats and determined the proper hierarchy. For the humans to omit this information entirely was either a massive oversight or something far more concerning. Kefra caught Ambassador Vasquez just before she boarded her transport vessel. She turned to face him with that same patient smile, and he towered over her like a mountain of living crystal facing a small and fragile flower. Ambassador, your submission was incomplete, he stated. You provided no military data. Was this an error? Vasquez looked up at him without any sign of fear or intimidation. No, High Inquisitor, it was not an error, she replied calmly. Then why was the information not included? The human woman's smile widened just slightly, and for the first time, Kefra saw something sharp and dangerous flickering in her dark eyes. You didn't ask, she said simply, and then she turned and walked onto her transport, leaving Kefra standing alone with a feeling he had not experienced in over 1,000 years. He did not know its name, but humans would have recognized it immediately. It was the first cold touch of doubt. 6 months passed after humanity accepted their place as a protected species, and during that time, the Kreth hegemony grew impatient. Commander Thros stood before his war council on the bridge of his flagship, his scarred reptilian face twisted with contempt as he outlined his plan to his officers. The humans have expanded to 3 colony worlds near our border, he growled. They call them Meridian 7, New Helsinki, and Prosperity. Nearly 12 million of these soft creatures live there now, building their little farms and their little cities. His officers laughed at the thought of humans trying to colonize space. The Concord has designated these worlds as being within our sphere of influence. Thros continued. We will conduct a border correction. 40,000 warriors should be more than enough to bring these colonies under our control. One of his younger officers raised a question. Commander, should we not inform the Velnorians before we act? Thros waved his massive clawed hand dismissively. The Velnorians will thank us for adding more workers to the Dominion, he replied. These humans are nothing. Each of our warriors can lift a ground vehicle with one arm. We can survive in hard vacuum for 20 minutes without protection. What can soft little humans do against us? The invasion fleet launched 3 days later, and Thros himself led the assault on Meridian 7. The largest of the 3 colonies, the Kreth warriors landed in perfect formation outside the main city, their weapons charged and their armor gleaming in the light of the alien sun. Thros marched at the head of his forces, ready to accept the surrender of the terrified humans. But the city was empty, the streets were deserted, and the buildings stood silent. Thros sent scouts ahead, and they reported the same thing everywhere they looked. No humans could be found. The food was still warm on tables in the dining halls. The machines were still running in the factories. Personal items lay scattered as if people had left in the middle of their daily activities. They have fled, one of his officers reported. The cowards ran before we even arrived. Thros felt a flicker of disappointment mixed with contempt. Find them, he ordered. They cannot have gone far. Search every building, every tunnel, every hiding place. His warriors spread out across the city as the sun began to set. The shadows grew long between the buildings, and the temperature dropped as night approached. Thros established his command post in what appeared to be a government building, and waited for reports from his search teams. The first report never came. An hour after sunset, Thras realized that one of his forward units had stopped responding to communications. He sent another unit to investigate, and they found nothing, no bodies, no signs of struggle. Just empty ground where 100 Kreth warriors had been standing. Then the screaming started. Across the city, Kreth warriors began dying in ways that made no sense. Sentries posted on rooftops vanished without making a sound. Officers were found dead in sealed rooms with their throats cut cleanly. Supply ships exploded from internal charges that no one had seen being placed. Thras ordered his forces to form defensive positions, but the attacks continued. The humans came from everywhere and nowhere, from beneath the ground, from inside buildings, from the darkness itself. They struck without warning and disappeared before the Kreth could respond. A desperate transmission came from one of his commanders on the other side of the city. "Commander Thras, they move like shadows. They do not fight like any enemy we have faced. They do not fight at all, they hunt. They hunt us like we are prey. We cannot see them. We cannot." The transmission ended in a wet, gurgling sound. By dawn, over 3,000 Kreth warriors lay dead. Thras had lost contact with half of his units, and the survivors were scattered and terrified. He ordered a full retreat, and his proud invasion force fled Meridian 7 in complete disarray. The Galactic Concord received his report with skepticism. "You are telling us that untrained human colonists defeated 40,000 Kreth warriors?" High Inquisitor Kefra demanded during the emergency council session. Thras stood before the Concord with his head bowed in shame, but his voice was steady when he replied, "They were not untrained, High Inquisitor. These humans fought like nothing we have ever seen. They used the darkness, the terrain, and our own assumptions against us. They knew exactly where we would be and exactly how we would respond." "And how many humans did you kill in return?" another delegate asked. Thras was silent for a long moment before answering. 11, he finally admitted. "We killed 11 of them." The chamber erupted in disbelief. 3,000 Kreth dead for 11 humans? It was impossible. The Concord dismissed the report as Kreth incompetence and moved on to other matters. But Kefra did not dismiss it. He ordered his agents to capture a human survivor from the Meridian 7 engagement. 3 weeks later, they delivered a small, scarred woman to his interrogation chamber on the Velnorian homeworld. She wore simple clothing and bore the marks of many battles across her weathered skin. "I am High Inquisitor Kefra," he announced as he towered over her restrained form. "You will tell me everything about the human forces that defeated the Kreth." The woman looked up at him with calm, steady eyes. "My name is Sergeant Maria Santos," she replied. "That is all you need to know." Kefra ordered his technicians to activate the mind probes devices that had broken the will of 1,000 species. But when they attempted to penetrate the humans' thoughts, they encountered something unexpected. Her mind resisted them, not through any technology or psychic ability, but through pure mental conditioning. The woman's thoughts were organized like a fortress, and every probe was met with walls of training and discipline that should have been impossible for such a young species. After hours of failed attempts, Kefra dismissed his technicians and faced the human woman alone. "What kind of soldiers attacked the Kreth?" he demanded. The woman laughed, a genuine, amused sound that echoed through the interrogation chamber. "Soldiers," she repeated. "High Inquisitor, those were not soldiers. Those were farmers, teachers, engineers, and shopkeepers. Those were ordinary people defending their homes and their families." Kefra felt that cold doubt return, spreading through his crystal matrices like ice. "If those were not your soldiers, then what are your soldiers like?" Sergeant Maria Santos smiled, and in that smile, Kefra saw something that made his ancient crystalline heart pulse with an unfamiliar rhythm. "You have not seen our soldiers yet," she said quietly, "and you should pray to whatever gods your people worship that you never do." The Velnorian War Council gathered in the great fortress orbiting their homeworld, and High Inquisitor Kefra listened as Fleet Commander Oros outlined his plan for the complete subjugation of humanity. "The Kreth failure has embarrassed the Dominion," Oros declared, his crystalline form pulsing with aggressive red light. "We must respond with overwhelming force. I propose we deploy the Obsidian Fleet, all 800 warships, to humanity's core systems." The other council members murmured their approval. The Obsidian Fleet had never known defeat. It had crushed rebellions, conquered empires, and brought entire civilizations to their knees. Against such power, what could a handful of humans possibly do? Only Kethvra hesitated. "Fleet Commander, I have concerns," he said carefully. "The humans have demonstrated unexpected capabilities. Perhaps we should gather more intelligence before." "Intelligence about what?" Oros interrupted with contempt. "They are a primitive species with crude technology. The Kreth were simply incompetent. Our warriors are made of living crystal. We do not fear the dark or the cold. We do not need rest or food. These humans cannot possibly stand against us." The council voted unanimously to approve the invasion, and Kethvra was overruled. 3 weeks later, the Obsidian fleet launched toward Earth. What the Velnorians did not know, what no species in the galaxy suspected, was that humanity had been preparing for this moment for over 100 years. In the year 2089, human scientists had detected the first alien signals coming from deep space. They had studied those signals in secret, learning about the Galactic Concord and the Velnorian Dominion long before official first contact, and they had understood immediately what awaited them among the stars. The galaxy was not a place of friendship and cooperation. It was a place where the strong consumed the weak, where primitive species were enslaved or destroyed, and where mercy was considered a sign of weakness. Humanity's leaders had made a choice. They would appear weak. They would act humble. They would hide their true strength until the moment when hiding was no longer possible. For 2 centuries, while the rest of Earth developed civilian technology and prepared for peaceful contact, a hidden network of military installations worked in absolute secrecy. They built weapons that no alien had ever imagined. They developed tactics based on every conflict in human history, and they trained soldiers unlike any the galaxy had ever seen. These soldiers were called the Lazarus Divisions. Admiral James Okonkwo stood in the command center of humanity's hidden fortress. Deep beneath the surface of Mars, he was a tall man with gray hair and steady hands, and he had spent his entire adult life preparing for the war that was now coming. Before him, hundreds of screens showed the approaching Velnorian fleet, 800 warships, each one massive and bristling with weapons that could crack a planet's crust. Any other species would have surrendered at the sight of such power. But Admiral Okonkwo only smiled. "Signal from the outer perimeter," his communications officer reported. "The Velnorians are demanding our immediate surrender." "Acknowledge their signal," Okonkwo ordered, "and then open a channel to all Lazarus Division commanders. Across the solar system on Earth, Mars, Europa, Titan, and a dozen other locations, men and women received their activation codes. They had trained for this moment since childhood. They had pushed their bodies and minds beyond every limit that nature had set. They had endured pain, isolation, exhaustion, and psychological pressure that would have broken any other species. They were humanity's ultimate warriors. Not because of genetic engineering or cybernetic enhancement the humans had rejected those paths. Their strength came from something the galaxy could not understand or measure: the human capacity for chosen suffering. These soldiers had volunteered for lives of hardship. They had embraced the pain of training because they believed in something greater than themselves. They fought not for conquest or glory, but for the families and communities waiting safely behind them. On the bridge of his flagship, Fleet Commander Oros watched with confusion as human ships began emerging from hiding places. Throughout the solar system, there were thousands of them, far more than intelligence had suggested, and they were fast, agile, and moving with perfect coordination. Where did these ships come from? Oros demanded. Our intelligence showed they had fewer than 100 vessels. His officers had no answers. The human fleet did not attack. Instead, they formed a defensive line at the edge of the solar system and waited. It was as if they were inviting the Velnorians to come closer. Admiral Okonkwo opened a broadcast on all frequencies, and his voice reached every ship in both fleets. Attention, Velnorian forces. I am Admiral James Okonkwo of the United Earth Defense Coalition. You have entered human space with hostile intent. This is your one and only warning. Fleet Commander Oros laughed at the audacity of this small human daring to threaten the Obsidian fleet. You warn us? He responded. We are 800 warships that have never been defeated. You are nothing but primitive creatures playing with technology you do not understand. Surrender now, and we may show mercy." There was a pause, and then Okonkwo's voice returned calm, steady, and utterly without fear. "You measured us by what we showed you. You never asked what we were hiding. For 200 years, we have watched you. We have studied your tactics, your weapons, and your weaknesses. We know everything about you." His voice hardened into something cold and sharp. "But you know nothing about us. You do not know why our ancestors survived ice ages that killed most life on our planet. You do not know why we endured plagues that should have destroyed us. You do not know what we did to each other in our darkest hours, and what we learned from that darkness." Every human soldier throughout the solar system heard their admiral's next words, and they felt their hearts surge with fierce pride. "Today, you learn why humanity fears nothing. Today, you learn what happens when you threaten our home. Today, Fleet Commander, you meet the wolves." The Obsidian fleet advanced, confident in their power. The Lazarus divisions prepared to show them exactly how wrong they were. The Battle of Soul began with silence. Fleet Commander Oros watched his tactical displays with growing unease. As the human ships maintained their defensive positions without firing a single shot, his fleet advanced in perfect formation. 800 warships bristling with enough firepower to shatter moons. And still the humans did not attack. "Why do they wait?" he muttered. "What are they planning?" The answer came when his fleet crossed an invisible line that the humans had drawn in the void of space. Suddenly, space itself seemed to come alive with human vessels. They emerged from behind asteroids, from beneath the surfaces of distant moons, from hiding places that Velnorian sensors had completely missed. Within seconds, the Obsidian fleet found itself surrounded. "All ships, engage," Oros commanded. The first wave of Velnorian weapons fire streaked toward the human vessels and missed. The human ships moved with impossible speed and precision, dancing through the barrage like they knew exactly where each shot would go. They did not fight like any enemy the Velnorians had faced before. They fought like predators who had been studying their prey for generations. But the true horror began when the human boarding parties launched. They called themselves the Void Dancers, elite soldiers trained since childhood to fight in the zero-gravity chaos of shipboard combat. They wore sleek powered armor that enhanced their natural abilities, and they moved through the vacuum of space like they had been born there. On the Velnorian flagship, alarms screamed as breaching pods slammed into the hull. Commander Oros ordered his warriors to defensive positions, confident that his crystalline soldiers would crush these fragile human invaders. He was wrong. The Void Dancers poured through the breaches in perfect fire teams, communicating through hand signals that humans had developed over centuries of warfare. They moved through the corridors like water flowing through cracks, never stopping, never hesitating, always advancing. The Velnorian warriors fought back with all their strength, but they had evolved for open-field combat where their size and power gave them every advantage. In the tight corridors of their own ships, that advantage disappeared. The humans used the cramped spaces to negate the Velnorians' reach, and turned every corner into a killing ground. Worse still, the humans adapted in real time. Every Velnorian tactic was countered within minutes. Every trap was anticipated and avoided. It was as if the humans could read their enemies' minds. Across the fleet, Velnorian ships began falling silent one by one. The second phase of the human assault was something the galaxy had never seen before. Psychological warfare. On every Velnorian communication channel, broadcasts began playing not demands for surrender, but something far more terrifying. The humans showed their enemies recordings from their own history. The trenches of the First World War, where humans had slaughtered each other by the millions in endless mud and blood. The concentration camps of the Second World War, where humans had committed horrors against their own kind that defied description. The nuclear standoffs of the Cold War, where humans had pointed weapons capable of destroying their entire civilization at each other, and had not blinked. The message was clear without any words being spoken. We have done worse to each other than you can imagine. We have faced extinction by our own hands and survived. You are not the monsters of our nightmares, we are. And now we are coming for you. Velnorian crews began surrendering not because they were defeated in battle, but because they were afraid. For the first time in 3,000 years, the warriors of the Dominion felt true fear. On Mars, the third and final theater of the Battle of Sol was unfolding. A Velnorian ground force had managed to establish a beachhead near the human colony of New Damascus. 30,000 crystalline warriors formed ranks on the red Martian soil, ready to prove that, at least on solid ground, the Dominion was still supreme. The humans who came to meet them were called the Iron Hearts. There were only 5,000 of them, and they wore minimal armor compared to their enemies. Many of them carried blades alongside their weapons, ancient tools of war that the Velnorians found laughably primitive, but they advanced across the Martian dust without hesitation, their eyes fixed on the enemy with an intensity that made even the most veteran Velnorian warriors uncomfortable. The battle was savage beyond anything the Velnorians had experienced. The Iron Hearts had trained for 15 years in Martian gravity and atmosphere. They knew every rock, every crater, every advantage the terrain could offer. They moved with a speed and aggression that seemed impossible for such fragile creatures, throwing themselves at the crystalline giants with absolute fearlessness. And they did not stop. A Velnorian general watched in disbelief as a human soldier, her arm severed completely, blood streaming from her wound, continued crawling toward his lines, with a grenade clutched in her remaining hand. She was laughing as she pulled the pin, laughing as she threw herself at a cluster of his warriors, laughing as the explosion shattered her body and took a dozen Velnorians with her. "Fall back!" the general screamed. "Full retreat! All units, fall back immediately!" His warriors obeyed with a speed born of pure terror. On the bridge of his burning flagship, Fleet Commander Oros managed one final transmission to the Galactic Concorde. His crystalline body was cracked and failing, and human soldiers were cutting through the last of his guards just meters away. Warning to all Concorde species, he gasped, "We were wrong about the humans. They are not a primitive species. They are not weak. They are not prey." The sounds of combat grew closer. "They are something we have never encountered. They are warriors who choose to suffer for what they believe. They are predators who were only pretending to be peaceful. Everything we believed about them was wrong." A human soldier appeared in the doorway, weapon raised. "Do not wake the wolves," Oros screamed into the transmission. "Do not threaten what they love. They will destroy you. They will destroy everything." There, the transmission ended. The Battle of Sol was over. The mighty Obsidian Fleet 800 warships that had never known defeat had been shattered. In less than 12 hours, most of the ships had not been destroyed but captured, their crews either dead or surrendered. The Velnorian ground forces had been driven from every world they had tried to take. Humanity had won, and the galaxy would never be the same. 1 year had passed since the Battle of Sol, and the galaxy was a very different place. The Velnorian Dominion had shattered like the crystal bodies of its fallen warriors. Without the Obsidian Fleet to enforce their rule, the 12 star systems they had controlled for 3,000 years erupted in rebellion. Species that had been enslaved for generations rose up against their masters, and the once mighty empire crumbled into chaos. The Galactic Concorde still existed, but it was a shadow of what it had been. The great powers that had once laughed at humanity now sent desperate messages to Earth, begging for treaties and alliances and protection. And in the great chamber where humanity had first been dismissed as nothing more than primitive animals, Ambassador Elena Vasquez returned to address the surviving representatives of the galaxy. The chamber was silent as she walked to the speaking platform. The beings who had mocked her species could not meet her eyes. High Inquisitor Kethra, once the most powerful figure in the Dominion, stood among them. With his crystalline form dimmed to a pale shadow of its former brilliance, he and the other Velnorian survivors had expected humanity to demand their complete destruction. That was what any other species would have done. That was what the Velnorians themselves had done to countless civilizations before. But that was not why Ambassador Vasquez had come. 1 year ago, I stood in this chamber and accepted an insult on behalf of my people, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the vast space. You called us weak. You called us primitive. You offered us slavery and called it protection. The delegates shifted uncomfortably. You were so certain of your superiority that you never stopped to wonder why we accepted your terms so easily, Vasquez continued. You never asked why a species capable of surviving everything our brutal world threw at us would simply bow down before strangers from the stars. She paused and looked around the chamber at the frightened faces of beings who had ruled galaxies. The answer is simple. We were waiting. We had been waiting for 200 years, building our strength in secret, preparing for the moment when we would have to show you who we really are. When your fleet came to our home with weapons raised, you gave us no choice. Kefra expected her next words to be a declaration of conquest. He expected her to announce the formation of a human dominion that would enslave them all, just as they had enslaved others. Instead, Ambassador Vasquez said something that shocked every being in the chamber. We did not fight for empire. We did not fight for revenge. We fought because you threatened our families, our homes, and our future. We fought because that is what humans do when everything we love is in danger. Her expression softened slightly. But the fighting is over now, and we have no desire to become what you were. We have seen where the path of conquest leads, and we reject it. She straightened and raised her voice. Humanity hereby offers full partnership to every species in this chamber. Not domination partnership, not servitude cooperation. We will share our technology, our knowledge, and our protection with any civilization that wishes to stand beside us as equals. The chamber erupted in confused murmuring. This was impossible. No species in galactic history had ever won a war so completely, and then offered friendship to their defeated enemies. Kefra stepped forward, his dimmed crystals flickering with uncertainty. Ambassador Vasquez, I do not understand, he said slowly. We threatened your existence. We tried to enslave your people. We killed your soldiers and invaded your worlds. After everything we did, why would you show us mercy? The human woman looked up at the towering crystalline being who had once dismissed her species as nothing more than clever animals. Because mercy is harder than war, she replied simply. Any species can learn to destroy. Any civilization can master violence. But it takes true strength to offer forgiveness to those who have wronged you. She smiled that same quiet smile that had unnerved Kefra at their first meeting. Humans have never chosen the easy path, High Inquisitor. We did not survive ice ages, plagues, and world wars by being cruel. We survived by protecting each other, by building communities, by finding hope in the darkest moments. That is our true strength, not our warriors, not our weapons, but our stubborn refusal to give up on each other. Her voice grew stronger. So yes, we offer you mercy. We offer you friendship. We offer you a chance to build something better than the empire of fear you once ruled. Not because you deserve it, but because we believe every species deserves a chance to be more than what they were. Kefra was silent for a long moment, and then he did something that no Velnorian had done in 3,000 years. He bowed. One by one, the other delegates followed his example, lowering themselves before the small human woman who had just reshaped the entire galaxy. With nothing more than words, far from the great chamber, across 100 worlds, the warriors of the Lazarus divisions were going home. They hung up their armor in storage lockers that might never be opened again. They put away their weapons and said goodbye to the comrades who had become their second families. They boarded transport ships that carried them back to the worlds they had sworn to protect. Sergeant Maria Santos, the same woman who had once told Kefra that he had not yet seen humanity's true soldiers, return to the small farm on Meridian 7. Where her wife and children were waiting. She walked through the front door, and her youngest daughter ran into her arms with a scream of pure joy. Mama's home. The little girl cried. Mama's finally home. Maria held her family close and let the tears flow freely down her scarred face. She had spent her whole life training to be a weapon, and now the war was over. She could finally be something else. Across the galaxy, the species who had once laughed at humanity watched these scenes with wonder and confusion. The terrible warriors who had destroyed the Obsidian fleet were planting gardens. They were playing with their children. They were sitting down to meals with their families, as if the most devastating war in galactic history had never happened. The wolves had won their battle, and now they simply wanted to go home. But every species understood the unspoken truth that hung over the new galactic order. The wolves would always be watching. They would always be ready. And as long as the humans drew breath, They would protect those they loved with a ferocity that no force in the universe could match. Humanity had shown the galaxy their fangs, and then they had shown something far more terrifying, their hearts, and the stars would never underestimate them again.